nobody can see this right now, but my arm is red. The left side of my body, my back, my chest, and my left arm are all red. But I also got into drinking, partying, and I like that. Not only was I doing drugs, I was selling drugs, and I made a whole lifestyle out of it. I was mad at God. And I'm not saying that's the right thing to do. I know that now. But you asked me then how I felt, and I was mad at God because He's taking everybody I love from me. You know, I talked about cannabis, coke, opiates, and now I'm in the methamphetamine. I get up there and the DA says, I want Mr. Walker to go to prison for the longest time period. He is a threat to this community, and he is causing a lot of harm in this community. In my last 2 years, I met a gentleman in prison that was doing life without parole. And he's like, what are you doing with yourself? He's probably one of the happiest men I've ever met in my life. And he's never getting out of prison. He said, I want you to write a letter to your daddy. I said, my daddy's dead. He said, I know. I can survive with the best of them in this world. What I didn't know how to do was to live.
Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Utter meaningless. Everything is meaningless. Do you know who said this phrase? King Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived. If you have ever read Ecclesiastes, you know that Solomon searched for meaning in the things this world had to offer. He literally had anything his flesh could desire. He had money, pleasure, and power, but nothing, and I mean nothing, could satisfy. Have you ever felt like you were just surviving? You know, just existing. When things get tough, you just white knuckle it and hope to survive until the trouble is past. Shouldn't there be more to life than just existing and surviving? Is there anything that can fill the emptiness inside and give me peace? Because I don't want to just survive, I want to thrive. Today, our guest is going to share his life change story with us, and I want you to observe how he answers these questions. I'm Eric Hutchinson, and this is the If Nothing Changes podcast. Our guest today is zooming in all the way from Wilkes County, North Carolina. So, hey, new friend, why don't you introduce yourself to our listeners?
Thank you, Eric. My name is Jeff Walker, and I think foremost, it's important to know that I am an individual in recovery. And I'm also a formerly incarcerated person. What does that mean? I spent most of my adult life using substances and acting out and doing things that I shouldn't, which caused me a lot of trauma, a lot of pain, and I would end up being incarcerated because I didn't quite know how to follow the rules. The beautiful part of that story is June 12th, I haven't found it necessary to use substances or drink any alcohol for 11 years. And I haven't been incarcerated or behind bars in 9 years. So 2 of those years of my 11 come from behind the wall in prison of my recovery journey. I live in Wilkes County, North Carolina. That is a very rural community in North Carolina. Grateful to be here. I thank you, Eric, for having me on here. It's an honor.
Well, Jeff, thanks again for coming and agreeing to take time out of your schedule just to share your testimony. I'm so excited. But as you know, every story has a beginning, so let's start with yours. Were you always in North Carolina? Where were you born and where were you raised? And tell us a little bit about your family.
Absolutely. I was born and raised in Wilkes County, North Carolina. Have been here the majority of my life. I have taken jobs and then traveled across the United States and when I was younger and done things like that. But my home's always been here in Wilkes County. Grew up on a chicken farm at a child, right? A lot of farming around the rural parts and things like that. I was in the beginning up until age 2 or 3. My family was together. And I had a father and I had a mother and I had a sister and I had a brother. I am the runt. I'm the baby of the family. But it started off very story-like, you know what I mean? It was a very beautiful family, but soon things changed.
So were you close to your dad or was there any distance between you guys?
So it become distance. The story I started off with, it lasted a short period of time for me. And then my mother and father end up separating. At that time, they did that right after we lost our sister. My sister was only 6 years old when she passed, and she died in a tragedy accident. You know, the old swing sets that people have, and you would get on the swing set and you would swing, but you would twist. You know, you would lay your head back and you would twist, and then it would take you the other way. And kids did it all the time. And she twisted, and the chain caught her throat. And so she ended up passing away on the way to the hospital because it damaged her throat so bad. So obviously, with that horrible tragedy, if my family uh, things came out during that time, and my father was. I am much like my father through this story you will hear, but I resented him for many years. My father was out partying and doing some things. Doesn't mean he didn't love his daughter. He loved his daughter very much. But during that situation, things came out, and then the loss of my sister, their daughter, uh, they separated. And so my parents separated, I think, at the age of, I was 3. And so have vague memories about my dad. That created some resentments as I got older that you may hear about in the story. Um, but I did love my father.
So do you remember, I mean, you were 3. Do you remember your sister at all? Do you remember that day or not?
I don't. I don't. I have vaguer memories, and sometimes I have dreams that she's holding me and things like that. And that's as of today. Like I still have these dreams, and I see pictures. And of course, I heard my mom's stories. My brother did for sure because he was older than all of us, and so he used to hold her a lot and things like that. So as far as traumatizing for me as it was for the rest of the family, um, not until I got older.
Well, it sounds like that was kind of a turning point for your mom and dad and your brother. You were pretty young, but can you tell me, like, was there any abuse after that you saw, like, with between your mom and dad? I mean, did they split up right after that, and did you just go with your mom, or tell me a little bit about the timeline there?
Yes, it was pretty much after my sister passed, and some things came out. My dad was seeing another lady and partying and doing things like that, and everything that comes with that lifestyle, right? He was doing that, and that came out. And there was never no abuse. You know what I mean? My father never put his hands on my mother. None of that. I'm happy to say that. But I went with my mother, and so we had to move from the chicken farm because that was my father's family, and we moved with nothing. I mean, we was poverty big time. My mother did the best she could. She had her family, her mother and father, which was my grandparents, that helped. But we moved into a 1 bedroom trailer, and it was tough for me and my brother.
So what was it like in, let's go to like elementary school and that sort of thing? Were you a outward individual kid, or were you more withdrawn? I mean, tell me a little bit about what was Jeff like in school.
Uh, so my elementary school days is a huge part of my story and the trauma that I soon figured out later on in life that came with that. For one, I just mentioned that my mother did the best she could, but we wore hand-me-down clothes. We didn't have a lot. I didn't look like other kids, and then to mention that, nobody can see this right now, but my arm is red. The left side of my body, my back, my chest, and my left arm are all red. And so what that is a birthmark. And the old doctors used to call it a pork wine stain. Um, and I've had it since birth. As a kid, that was horrible, right? Because other kids, or some of them were scared and didn't want to talk to me. Then some of them wanted bullied. And so that created a behavior with me over the years. I got tired of being bullied, and I started fighting back. And that created a behavior of fight first and to survive. And so my elementary years was tough. It was tough. I did have a couple friends, bless their hearts, that stood by me, but I was an outcast. I was always trying to fit in somewhere, always trying to fit in, and I felt like I never did. I used to go home and cry to my mother, in sixth, seventh grade. I don't know what time. I'd go home and cry. And Eric, she'd always say, God made you special. And I didn't feel special at that time, right? Now, as we go through my story, God did make me special.
So you mentioned God. I mean, now. So was there a God? Was there God in your family? Was there faith in your family in your pre-high school years? Was that a part of your everyday life or weekly or tell me about that?
Absolutely. My mother, my nanny and poppy is what I call them, right? That's my mother's mother and father, very big in the church. It was every Wednesday night, every Sunday night, and they would come and get me if my mom couldn't go. If my mom was working, they would make sure I'm in church. So they brought me up uh, in church. Had a horrific accident in Sunday in Bible school. I was out in the graveyard with other kids, and a tombstone was loose from the foundation and it fell over on me at the age of 7 years old. And lucky enough, once again, God kept me here during that. I had to be airlifted to a hospital away from our county. And the break was something at that point in time that, doctors had never seen. So I had to, have special doctors, and which they was wonderful. And obviously, I was hospitalized for 6 months. I was in a hip spike body cast for 6 months. And then it took me 2 years to learn how to walk again. And so, brought up in church, horrible accident that during that time, I remember sitting in my hospital rooms and flowers and balloons and all the people from the church coming and seeing me and checking on me. And then the whole church community that time, was praying.
So did you make any decisions for Christ as a child that you remember? And I don't know what, denomination you're in. Some denominations, the kids, they get baptized at birth, and then some people, they make a decision and then they get baptized. I mean, what was it like for you?
Yeah, so my grandparents went to a Southern Baptist church, and I was saved shortly after I came back from that tragic accident. Right, so 8, 9 years old, I was saved in that church with my grandparents, and yeah.
So do you believe that decision as a child that you knew what you were doing, that you made it for the right reasons, or did you do it because you thought you were expected to, or because other friends were doing it? I mean, tell me a little bit about what was going on with your heart.
So I believe I did it in that time because it's what my grandparents wanted me to do. And I had seen other people, other kids in the church doing it. I don't really think that I knew the meaning behind that. I don't, which doesn't mean that it didn't help. And that's not the reason that I'm still here. But I did it because, my family wanted me to do it. But did I understand what I was doing at the age of 8 years old? No.
So let's move forward into junior high, high school, into adolescence. So did you witness any kind of, drugs or alcohol abuse or any of that kind of thing at all whenever you were, going into adolescence?
Not necessarily in my living environment or surrounded by my living environment. I've got to say this, like my mom worked her butt off to better us each year, each day of her life. It was her mission for us to have what she felt like we needed. And going into high school, it's funny you asked that. Like you heard my elementary days and the challenge for that. And so I was so excited to be going to high school. Well, my mom had met this wonderful man and been dating him for a period of time. Um, and they decided to get married going into my freshman year, which is great. I loved him. He soon become my stepdad, and he's been a huge person and inspiration in my life. But we had to move. We had to move out of that district and move to another high school district that I didn't know nobody. Nobody knew me. So then all this trauma and stuff starts coming up about here I go. I'm gonna have to hear everybody talk about my arm, make these comments. I don't want to fight no more. I don't want to get in trouble no more. I want to be a teenager. And so we made that transition regardless. I had to, and it ended up being the best days of my life. Uh, my high school, I call my high school years my glory years, right? My first 3, 4 months of school, yes, there was people staring at me. There's people looking at my arm, but most people would come up and say, "Hey, what happened to you?" Cool. I was okay with that. You know what I mean? And then sitting there staring or talking about me or something like that. I encourage people to come up and say, "What's wrong with your arm?" And I would tell them, and I could overcome this birthmark that had been causing me so much trauma. I had finally overcome it and started to fit in. But I also got into drinking, partying, nothing. I mean, like some kids do, right? It wasn't nothing out of control, but and I was not a good student as far as grades. You know what I mean? I was decent enough athlete at that time. It was different. You didn't have to average any type of GPA to play. You just had to pass. And so at that time, if you was a decent athlete, then you're going to pass on through to the next grade so you can play ball next year. And I thoroughly took advantage of that. And I knew that. And so I didn't go to college. Right. All my friends went to college and my grades wasn't good enough. And I wasn't that much of a superstar athlete to where I could go to college without decent grades. So kind of my dreams and all my things I wanted to do kind of fell to the side.
So what did you do then? Did you go straight into work, or what happened?
So I in high school, I felt like I fit in with people, right? I had found my community, I had found my people. And then most of them people in that community went on to colleges like a lot of people do, or went into workforce or however that looked for them. I kept partying and I found and 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 I liked that. I liked the way it made me feel. Um, I liked the lifestyle and I found other people that felt the same way. And so, yes, I worked all kinds of jobs, landscaping, factory. I couldn't hold down a job for a long time. But I worked all kinds of jobs, but I went from job to job. My main objective each day was to party. And that's what I did for several years. I thought that's who I was. Not only was I doing drugs, I was selling drugs, and I made a whole lifestyle out of it.
How did that come about? I mean, was it one of those things that, I mean, did you get approached by another dealer, or did you just, start doing it on your own? Or, I always wonder, how do people get into dealing drugs?
Well, for me, right, because I was someone that used substances, I am an addict. Um, and I told you I could hold down a job because of my addiction. And so I found a way by keeping my habit up, and that's by selling drugs, right? And at that time, you're in a community of people that several people are doing that, and it looked like something I wanted to do. And so I started, with marijuana, with cannabis. I started there, which in the big schemes of things isn't that big of a deal. Once I started doing cocaine, I sold that. And so I was uh, a drug dealer, kind of like sell three, one for free kind of person, trying to just support my own habit.
So that's interesting. So were you able to manage that, where you could bring in enough money to support your habit and live? I mean, you said you had a hard time holding a job. So did that become your career then? You just became the drug dealer, or what?
For several years, but I will say I got a fairly big break. I had job after job, but I got a fairly big break at the age of 24, and I got a job at UPS, United Parcel Service, and that is a union job. For one, they don't drug test. That was good, and You had to work part time. And in Wilkes, it's in Wilkes, and so I had to work part time. It's just a seniority position. So as people retire, you move up, you move up, you move up. But I worked part time for 7 years, and that was from 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. every day, Monday through Friday, which still allowed me to live my lifestyle that I was living of selling and using. Um, but I ended up becoming a full time driver at the age of 28, 29. I ended up becoming a full time driver for UPS and was making great money. At that time, though, I was still selling and using and doing the things I was doing. I done my first opiate while working at UPS. Someone not at UPS, but someone handed me this pill and said, "Here, take this. It'll make you feel better." And this was in 2002. At that time, Oxycontin wasn't what they are now, right? Nobody had figured this out. And so I took it and I worked all day. I went home like it made me feel like a superhuman. And so what I do, I found more. And that I was capable of managing somewhat of a lifestyle up until opiates, right? Like, I had a place to live. I had a car. I had, I had a Harley Davidson. I was living, so to speak. I was an addict, but I was living, taking care of, selling, and still had money. When I started opiates, it all kind of dwindled fairly quick.
So let me ask you this question. What happened to your faith? What happened to God during all of that? I mean, you're an adult now, even though you're in your 20s, you're not living with your mom. And so what happened to your faith? Did you just push it aside? Did you have any kind of guilt or, gosh, I need to get back into church or any of that thing?
I was mad at God. And I'll tell you why. And I've been waiting on this question. When I was 25, my father passed. He became a diabetic at the age of 45. He was still doing things he shouldn't be doing anyway. He died behind the wheel and wrecked. So he died before he wrecked. We talked about earlier the relationship with my father and the resentments that I'd had because of what I've been told. And what I was told was true. And I just resented my father a lot of his life. Now I would go stay with him every other weekend, and he loved me unconditionally, but I resented. Right before he died, me and him had connected back and was getting ready to really be a father and a son. Now I was 24 years old, but the reason is because I had become him. And so I had a better understanding of why he did the things he did, and that he always loved me more than anything. And so he died. You know what I mean? And we didn't get to live that life together. You know what I mean? That I wanted for me and my father. That happened. Okay. I had a best friend that died shortly after that. A good friend of mine. We hung out every day. He was much like me. You know what I mean? But he was a good person, good friend, love people, love community, love me. And then towards the end of my UPS career, UPS had done everything, and that is a great company to work for. I would say this: they sent me to treatment twice. They they understood that I had a problem, and they did everything they could to try to help to fix that problem. And I got out of treatment, and shortly after I got out of treatment, I got a phone call from my grandmother that told me that my mother was in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, which is a big hospital here in North Carolina. I was in Florida. I had went to Florida for a little while to stay with a girl. And I was in Florida. I need to get on a red-eye flight and fly home immediately. And so I did that. When I got to Chapel Hill, my mother was hooked up to all these machines. She she's non-responsive, and the machines was what was keeping her alive. Okay. Now, she was my rock. My mother loved me unconditionally. She got a rare disease called Wilson's disease. Like one out of 350,000 people get it. And so I never got to say bye to my mom. We had to take her off life support. And so that all happened. And then I was mad at God because why are you doing this to me, God? You're taking all these people. I didn't know how to grieve, right? Because I was using substances, and that's how I was grieving. I was using substances, and the more grief, the harder I use substances. And so I was mad at God. And I'm not saying that's the right thing to do. I know that now. But you asked me then how I felt, and I was mad at God because He's taking everybody I love from me.
Did you have any remorse or anything about your drug use or any of that things? Was there anything going on inside of you that said, man, I really shouldn't be doing this? Or was it just like, I don't care?
In the beginning, no, because it was fun. You know what I mean? It was fun. The lifestyle, the women, the partying, that was attractive. I thought that's who I was. I was good at it. And I thought that's who I was as a person, as a man. Um, in the beginning, it was fun. Towards the end, I was miserable. I was miserable, miserable, miserable. And, UPS tried and I wanted to stop, but I would come back out and I would get around the wrong crowd and I would start back. And it was just a repetitive pattern of trying to get sober. And so, yeah, but at the end, I was miserable.
So did you get into trouble with the law at all before, I mean, usually guys that end up dealing drugs and that's what there's usually uh some conflict with the law at some point. Did you get caught at any point or did you just get by?
I did get caught, and I'm fortunate that I went as many years as I did without getting caught. And I swear, I think my mom had something to do with that when she was alive. Because when she was alive, I got in a little bit of trouble here and there, simple possessions, nothing major, no felonies, right? Speed tickets, this smaller stuff. But when she passed, um, I started manufacturing methamphetamine, right? It hit our community like a plague. Everybody was doing it. And so, of course, I figured out how to do that. I started manufacturing methamphetamine. Once again, I lost my job at UPS. My mother had passed. I was mad at God. And so this is the way I supported myself. It was by doing that. And, I talked about cannabis, coke, opiates, and now I'm in the methamphetamine. And I still had an opiate problem bad. And so I was manufacturing methamphetamine. Yes, I did it, but to feed my opiate addiction. And so after my mom passed, I was going in and out of jail all the time, uh, all the time. Possessions, maintaining and dwelling, just different tickets. And ultimately, you start doing that, you go in and out of jail a lot, then you go to the big boy place, which is prison. And so I've been twice to prison, done about 5.5, 6 years in prison. Um, and I probably done a year, 2 years in jail.
So tell me how you got caught.
I got caught because of stupidity. First of all, the one thing about methamphetamine is you will stay up for weeks at a time, not just days, but for weeks at a time. And when you start uh, going through sleep deprivations, and you don't cognitively make the best decisions. And so me and a crew of people left the house and you make meth, you can make it in a bottle. It's called the shake and bake method or the one pot method, whatever people want to call it. And we put the bottle in the van and we went we went on the ride. And so as soon as we pulled out of the house, law got behind us. And then I knew that they was watching that house. And we took a left on the road. We passed another cop, and then by the time we got down the road, they were sitting there waiting on us. And so we was in the front page of the paper. The first person caught with a mobile meth lab was the topic. You know what I mean? Um, and all four of us at that time went to jail, and I sit in jail for about 6 months. That was my first felony. I had several felonies in that, but that was my first felony. They dropped it down to precursor cause I was not the container, the bottle was not mine. And I honestly say that. I was driving a vehicle. I didn't have a license at that time. I was driving a vehicle. And so eventually everything worked out to where the bottle was not mine. But they dropped my charges to precursor, which just means the chemicals to make them. Everybody in court that day was getting probation for precursors, right? And so my lawyer, which is a great friend of mine today, he's like, "This is what everybody's getting. You should get it." We get up there, and the DA says, "I want Mr. Walker to go to prison for the longest time period. He is a threat to this community. and he is causing a lot of harm in his community. He is a known methamphetamine maker. And so it was in Superior Court, which is big boy court too. And so they sent me at the max at that time. I didn't have much of a record. They gave me 2.5 years. And so that was new to me, and it was fearful. Um, right now I'm 6'3", 225 pounds. Then I was 6'3", and I weighed about 170 pounds. And so when I got to prison, I really didn't know what to do. You know what I mean? I was trying to get in where I fit in, right? And be respectful and not have to fight and not go to the hole and all the things we do. Um, and so in the beginning, I would partake in, there's drugs in prison. I promise you, there's plenty of drugs in prison. And so I would once again found myself around that crowd. Uh, but before I got out, the first time I started to going to church. I met some other people that was positive, that was from our community that I knew, and that was going to church and going to NA meetings and going to all these stuff. And so I'd quit using. I'd quit using drugs a year before I got out of prison the first time.
How long were you in prison for then that first time? Was it just a year or 2 years? I know you get sentenced, but how long did you actually spend?
I spent 2 years.
Oh, you did the full 2 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
My sentence was 36 months.
Okay.
And so I had to spend 2 years was my minimum. In here in North Carolina, you got a max, you got a minimum, right? And so you can't go below that minimum. And so 2 years was my minimum. And I spent that in there. But something happened to me while I was in there. Um, like once again, trying to fit in places. And I found myself fitting in pretty good in prison. Right? Like after about a year, 15 months, prison, it didn't bother me. And at that time, I didn't realize that was a problem, but it didn't bother me. Before released, like I said, I had stopped using substances in there, and I was going to some church services, and I didn't have no home plan because everybody's gone. So I didn't have a home plan, and I dated this girl in high school. Right, this beautiful girl, and I dated her for about 5 years, and I got real close to her family, and their family are very good Christian, spiritual people. And they, after my mom died, that family, they would call me. I would go over there, and they knew what was going on. They knew what I was doing. It was obviously, and I would tell them what I was doing, but they loved me deeply and they loved me unconditionally. So that was my home plan. I had been communicating with them while I was in prison, and they said, "You can come and stay with us." And and so they let me. I come out of prison. I was, I had a monitoring. I had all these things, and I went and stayed with them. But the rules was no drugs. See, no drugs. I didn't have a license at the time. They would transport me to jobs or anywhere I wanted to go, but no drugs. And so I made it there about 3 weeks without doing drugs. And I think the reason why I coming out of prison the first time, I had all these grandiose plans. Right. The one thing I haven't mentioned is I had kids. Right. I had kids through this journey, 3 beautiful kids. And I hadn't been in their life, obviously, a lot. You know what I mean? I was a father, but I wasn't a dad. Uh, and I wanted to have a relationship with my kids. And I wanted my license back. And I wanted a good job. And I had some great plans and some great visions. When I got out, I thought all that should happen in about 3 weeks on my time, not God's, but mine. And when it didn't happen, I went back to doing what I know how to do best, and that's surviving. Right? I can survive with the best of them in this world. What I didn't know how to do was to live. And so I went back to surviving. Ultimately, they found out that I was using, and it broke the lady's heart and had to keep me out. So I was back off to the races, ripping and running. I made it out 10 months. I made it out here in this world for 10 months. And I caught 4 charges. and I was on probation. So obviously it violated my probation, and I went back to prison for 3.5 years.
Wow. You started using, you started selling. What got you caught the second time?
Well, I started using about 3 weeks out of prison, right? And I was able to not get in trouble for 10 months. And so I actually finished parole, but I had started using. I got back into manufacturing meth and just all that old behavior that I was doing, what I went back to surviving doing. I was at someone's house. Uh, their family kind of knew, I guess, what was going on and called the law, and they came up here and caught me with precursors and everything to manufacture methamphetamine again. And I
So,
went to
last I talked to you about God, you said you were angry at God. So were you still angry at God? I mean, now if you go through a recovery program, whether it's secular or not, there's a higher power, and they say all this stuff. So I mean, did you just go through the motions, and were you still angry at God? Tell me what's going on spiritually with you.
so second time in prison, 3.5 years. My first year I was in there, I was wilding out, fighting in the hole, using substances, just doing it all. You know what I mean? I was mad because I was still mad at God. And it was his fault that I was going through all this stuff. Mainly the loss of the people I loved. In my last 2 years, I met a gentleman in prison that was doing life without parole. I mean, he'd never getting out. He had a crime of passion. He killed somebody. He walked in on his wife and he killed both of them. Right. And I say that to say this, it's like he connected with me. He was older. I never talked to him, but he came up to me one day on a yard meeting where people go for rec time. And he's like, "What are you doing with yourself?" And he said, "It's simple. If you do not change in here, you're not going to change when you get out of here." And he said, "You're going to do a life sentence in installment plans, and you're going to continue to see me." And I was using it at that time, and I'm like, he said, "I can help you." And so you got to be careful in prison when things like that happen, right? Because not everybody's genuine about what they're trying to do. Um, and so I told him no, I didn't need his help. But I started watching him, and to this day, he's probably one of the happiest men I've ever met in my life. And he's never getting out of prison. And you could see that. You could see that in his face. You could see that the way he carried himself. You could see that how he spoke to people. And that attracted me. And so I went back to him like, "What are you talking about?" And so for him, that was God and NA meetings. He found his higher power through the NA meetings, but that was God. And so I started detoxing off the substances I was on. I had detox. He helped me through that. I started going to church services with him. I started going to NA meetings with him. And then he got me to do something that was one of the biggest steps I could have taken. I'm not just talking about the 12 steps, but as we worked the 12 steps, on the fourth step, he said, "I want you to write a letter to your daddy." I said, "My daddy's dead." He said, "I know." And he said, "Then I want you to write a letter to your sister." And he said, "You talked about her a lot. Then I want you to write a letter to your mom, and then your best friend that passed, and all these people that you haven't grieved over yet." And he said, "They've been gone for a while, and you still not grieved." And so I did that and sit in prison in a day room at a table and bawled like a baby. But I wrote to him, and as simple as that sounds, it was a relief for me. You know what I mean? Because I wrote to him exactly how I felt. The apologies, I'm sorry. You know what I mean? And at that moment, through that process, I become more free in a prison than I had been in this world in a long time. Right. And so he was my mentor. People may call him sponsor, mentor. He was just somebody that could realize that I needed help. And he seen potential in me that I had not seen. And so you got different levels in prison, right? There's close custody, medium custody, and minimum. I couldn't get out of medium because of my behavior. I was fighting, always going to a hole. Like, to get to the lowest level, you've got to be good. And up until I met him 9 months later, I got my minimum custody. I quit getting in trouble. I quit using substances. You know what I mean? He couldn't because he had a life sentence. He would never make it past where he's at. Uh, and so, I took the things he taught me to the next prison I went to, and I was tested. I was tested many times, and he told me that. Um, and my last 2 years coming out of prison, I went to all kinds of church services, right? So I started supporting people, my last 17 months. And what I mean is trying to do what that guy did to me, help guide them to to Jesus, or to church, and people that used to be me in there wilding out and stuff like that. I would go talk to them. And so when I got out, this time I didn't have too many plans. Because last time I had plans, it didn't work out too well for me. And so what I did was give it to God. You know what I'm saying, like, you got me. Look what I'm doing. I didn't have a home plan. I was homeless. And then by giving it to God and getting out of the way, 30 days before I got out, there is this transitional house that opened up in our county, there was nothing like that. We didn't have no services here in this county. And it was a brand new men's facility that held like 5 men, a little bitty house. Uh, and then that lady I stayed with, I told you about that the first time I was out of prison, they own a print and ship company, right? I mean, they print materials, they do all this cool stuff. And the lady who had opened up the transitional house took some paperwork to be printed there. And she read it. And she said, I've got somebody that needs this bad. He has nowhere to go. So she sent me the application. I filled it out. I got accepted. And it was my first time ever, coming out of prison into a transitional house, into that environment. But you had to go to meetings. So I went to meetings. You know what I mean? You could go to church as far as a meeting. It didn't matter what you did. You just had to go do something for yourself. Uh, got a job. I worked a horrible job, making $7.25 an hour, but I was grateful for it. And then I was asked to work for the transitional house, right? The executive director said, hey, would you mind being the house manager? House manager is a guy who watches over other guys, right? And I did that. And then the board chair, when we turned to a nonprofit, he said, can you grow this men's program? I said, sure. And so that's kind of where it started growing. Coming into that transitional house was a huge step for me, right? I had never done anything like that. It was new to me. It put me around a community of people like me, but they were thriving and they was positive, and they wasn't, using substances. They wasn't drinking alcohol. They wasn't doing nothing besides support one another, right? And I told you when I was in prison, I found value in trying to be of service to other people in the best way I could while I was in there. And I carried that value out with me because I felt like that's what I was led to do by God, right? It made me feel good about myself. So when I took the job working for the transitional house, it was helping people just like me all the time. That's what I did. But my relationship with God just continued to grow. And we go to today, and things in my life, by getting out of the way and trusting Him, is where I am today. And I live a life today that I thought I would never live. I'm employed today with the nonprofit I helped start, and we're doing amazing work. I sit at the table with sometimes county commissioners, state legislation, with just different people in this community that I thought I would never be a part of. And I give back to this community. I cause this community. That DA was right. I was a threat to this community. You know what I mean? I couldn't see that then, but I was causing our community that I love very much a lot of harm. And so I have been led to believe that it is my duty to be of service to people like me in this community to better support this community.
So you're still working or managing the transition house, is that correct?
Well, not now. I did that for about 4 years, and we had two programs at that time, It was 3 transitional houses, men and women separate from men. And then I started a thrift store. Oh, me and the executive director started a thrift store. And the reason we did that is because I come out of prison with the clothes on my back. And that was the clothes they give me. And that's all I had, and a $45 gate check. And as I was going through this journey, I found there's a lot of people like me that didn't have nothing. And so we reached out to the community and asked for any clothes or anything like that. Before you know it, we had garages full. And so we opened up a thrift store to make sure people have what they need, right? It's also a work program. It was just those 3 programs. I mean, just those 2 programs for a while. Today, my title is Director of Programs of Wilkes Recovery Revolution. Our mission is to create a community where recovery is possible by restoring hope, repairing lives, and rebuilding communities, right? We have 12 unique programs that we call our recovery ecosystem.
Now, earlier I asked you when you were a child if you felt like that decision that for Christ was sincere, and you said no. I felt like I did it more for my family, or for it wasn't. So in prison, did you have a coming to Jesus moment? And was it with your mentor guy, or what? Tell me a little bit about that.
I did. As this mentor, as I was walking with him, your church services in prison, state of North Carolina, most of the time they're coming from out. They're volunteers coming in. And every prison has what you call a chaplain, but the church services. And so, I got saved while I was in prison. And that was a game changer for me, right? And it's a process, much like anything, but I knew my heart at that time, and I had become the person that I always wanted to become. You know what I mean? I knew the person was in me. My mom did. My grandma did. My grandma always, she'd say, "I'll keep praying for you." And thank God she did. You know what I'm saying? And my mom would always talk about this person that I am and who I am and this beautiful kid and beautiful man. And I could never see that. You know what I mean? I was bad. This is who I was, not this person. And so I started through process becoming this person that I always wanted to become, right? And I realized first that it's not God's fault that everybody died. You know what I mean? That was me thinking that way. You know what I mean? Life happens on life's terms, right? Unfortunately, good, beautiful people leave this earth way too soon. My mom was 56 and my dad was 54. Young in my eyes. I'm 48 today, so maybe that's young. And it happened. Once I accepted Jesus and understood that none of this was his fault, all that pain, all that trauma, all those struggles, I grew from it. And in a way today that I practice it every day with other humans. And so those tragedies in my life strengthened me to who I am today.
One last question. What encouragement would you give someone? Maybe they've listened to this and they've heard your story and they think, man, I'm in the middle of my addiction, or I'm in the middle of what's going on bad in my life right now. What hope, what message can you give to the listener?
I would say, my name is Jeff Walker. I'm an individual in recovery from substance use, mental health. I'm a formerly incarcerated person. I spent most of my life ripping and running, doing things I shouldn't. Today, I'm in recovery. I'm a part of the community. Change is possible. Change is probable, right? Like there's nothing that you can't do with God's help. Be a part of the community. Reach out in your community. Reach out to me. Reach out to whomever it is to start the change process, because change is possible.
Jeff, thanks so much for sharing your life change story with us. Hey, if you are listening today and you feel like that you are just existing, just trying to survive, in the last chapter of Ecclesiastes, King Solomon concluded that the only thing that has true meaning in life is the pursuit of God. Maybe you are tired of just surviving and you want something more. Jesus Christ can change your life and bring meaning and purpose to your life beyond anything that you have ever experienced, just like he did for Jeff. However, If nothing changes, nothing changes. See you next time.